for conference room, I'm Chairperson Mayor Zach Quint. We'll go around the room and do introductions.
Shane Burkhart, Commission Member.
Tim Schwecke, Civitech.
Charlie Handy, Civitech.
Sue Wesley, Commissioner.
Lee Tao, Commission Member.
Joe Terry, Secretary.
Adam Tagan, Community Development Director.
And the other elected officials get introduced.
Tom Rione, 4th District, Baldwin.
Scott Kellogg, Alderman.
Jake Catton, Alderman.
All right, and our guests and visitors, if they have not signed in, please do so if you can, for the record.
Yeah.
Great, thank you all for being here. We'll move on to item number 1, which is the public hearing on proposed new zoning code and zoning map. The proposed zoning code, which includes a new zoning map, is a comprehensive rewrite with changes to procedures, design standards, and allowable uses and bulk requirements which may affect all areas of the city of Wisconsin Rapids. Draft zoning code and map is available on the project website at wisconsin-rapids-zoning.civitechprojects.com/meetings. With that, I will open the public hearing, and I will turn it over to Adam to, well, actually, you want to introduce the public hearing, Adam? That'd be great.
So I think most people in this room are aware, but this is a project we started a long time ago, about 2.5 years ago. So the intent was that we would be taking the current code, basically disposing of the old code and rewriting the new code from scratch versus trying to go in and modify the existing code and do a comprehensive update. So that process has been underway for quite some time. We are now at the point where we have the commission has basically created a draft that they were comfortable with moving forward to for the public hearing. So the purpose of this, and then over the next few days up until the next city council meeting, is the public hearing for this. So this is intended to gather information outside of the Plan Commission and the city council. So any comments that public would receive, Plan Commission would consider and then determine if any changes would be necessary. I did provide a memo outlining some additional changes as well, that just in my another read through and then an opportunity to sit down with the city attorney, found some additional items that I would recommend for either discussion or change. And then the other portion of the zoning code update is the fact that a new zoning map would be adopted. So that would be kind of the second point of discussion. For the most part, I would say probably 95 or 90% of the parcels are, for the most part, just staying the same or being put into the most similar category that is under the new zoning code. Others are being changed for a variety of reasons. One example that we'll cover is mobile home parks, for example. They have traditionally been zoned R3, which allows a wide variety of uses, including mobile home parks. Under the proposed draft zoning code, mobile home parks are only allowed in one specific district, so it makes sense to have the existing mobile home parks zoned mobile home park so that they can continue to operate in a legal fashion. So there are changes like that. Another one that probably is the most obvious between the current zoning map and the proposed zoning map is that we don't have an agricultural district anymore. We're calling that a rural residential. So it seems like it's a rezoning, but in effect it's for the most part a very similar district that still allows some limited agricultural, but is really intended as more of a holding district for future development. So there's a wide variety of things we can discuss. I will leave it up to the mayor and commission on how we want to move forward on input discussion.
All right, so as was mentioned, this is the public hearing for this document and for the proposed zoning code and zoning map. So I want to make that known that this is our opportunity to take input from the public. We did receive one piece of written correspondence at the meeting. I think you all have a copy of that, so you can certainly review that. I'd allow the party that submitted that an opportunity to speak if you wish to do so. We're going to open the floor for comments from the public. So I'll entertain commentary from anyone in the room that has a comment on the proposed zoning code.
I'm Cynthia Hankey representing the Meadwater Foundation. We own several properties in the downtown overlay district, and we have submitted in writing for all of your review comments regarding some of our concerns regarding that overlay district. Based on conversations and review of the code, it appears that the downtown design overlay district is based on the current central commercial zoning code B1, and it does not seem to reflect the future anticipated downtown development, nor does it reflect changes that have already taken place in that area designated by the overlay. There is some concern regarding the proposed zoning provisions that may reduce the dollar value of the properties within that district by adding new requirements, additional steps for review, and imposing restrictions on potential development. And there was concern regarding the language indicating that the code would supersede previous legal agreements riding with property that lies within the overlay district, and that there may be some inconsistencies with the application of restrictions as it relates to the greater downtown area. It's our understanding that the restrictions for that overlay area are more stringent and may be more difficult.
Thank you. Others in the room that would wish to speak on the proposed zoning code rewrite project or the zoning map?
I'd like to add just one
Sure.
thing. What we are requesting is that perhaps there be a delay in the recommendation so that stakeholders would have an opportunity to have some further discussion and additional time for consultation and review.
Thank you. Others wishing to speak in favor or against or offer comments on the proposed new zoning code and zoning map? And for the third and final time, anyone wishing to speak on the zoning code, map, or code? Adam?
Yes, I will take this opportunity.
This is the public road, you're gonna, wait.
I'm not the public.
Yeah, oh, wait, oh, we'll just wait to see that everyone's right, public, and then you can go to staff comments.
Okay, that will work. I don't want to step on Bryce toes.
All right,
And
anyone?
close the public hearing and then go.
Yeah, all right, so seeing no further requests to speak, indicating by hand or something else, we'll close the public hearing officially at 5:08 p.m.
I would, just a real quick question on process. Obviously, when you close the public hearing, that's the end of public discussion. And if that's the intent, that's fine. But, once you close the public hearing, it's basically Plan Commission, City Council acting. You can't engage again, you can't accept written comments, it's basically closed.
Okay, I guess I meant more like the public, he's not a member of the public to speak and asking for people to speak, but I was in there then. I thought, well, then we'll go to staff comments and it's still, but.
So your preference and recommendation is that we go into staff comments before we close the public hearing?
Right.
Well, that plus maybe
Yeah.
just keep, adjourning the public hearing so that if that's your intent, to allow more people to comment and or to, engage or discuss further.
True, or
So-
if there's any clarification on any correspondence that's been, okay.
Correct.
I understand your point. So we will not close the public hearing.
As a matter of,
Sure, Jerry?
back in the public hearing here again, I would second that as a member of the public to be heard. If there's, I would expect that there would be more interaction than just one comment, and that it would be taken under advisement and then disappears. I assume we'll be engaging in this meeting to some degree.
Sure, yeah, and we can certainly keep the public hearing if that's from a process standpoint, that's completely fair. We've gotten a little bit gray on some of that in the past, so we'll keep the public hearing open for that sake. Joe?
I do have a question. I do have some questions relating to this. Would it be appropriate to wait until after Adam makes some comments, or is it appropriate to ask some of those questions now?
Adam, were your comments pertaining to the submitted commentary?
No, mine was going to be regarding my memo and other changes.
Oh, sure, which is a good point of why we wanted to keep that in the hearing. So go ahead, Joe.
Okay. With the foundation's concerns, looking for some specifics as far as what parts of the zoning code in particular are of concern. It says the proposed boundaries have not been adjusted to reflect future and anticipated downtown developments or changes that have already taken place. Do you have some specifics for where those locations are and what your suggestions are?
Well, you have an area greater than what you propose, but there may be some properties that could be included in the downtown overlay that have not been. And specifically, you've got the Wood County River Block building listed as commercial and it's institutional. And it's listed in that overlay district.
The second one, the proposed zoning provisions will reduce the dollar value of properties within the downtown overlay district by adding new requirements, additional steps to review, and imposing restrictions on potential development. Do you have any details as far as, the reduced dollar value of properties?
Well, it may make it more costly to develop, meeting the requirements that you've laid out.
What requirements specifically are of concern?
I think this would go back to the final paragraph of that letter. I think we have not, the foundation, as far as I'm concerned, has not spent enough time in front of this document to really outline completely all of the requirements that I think when you start reading through that, you begin to understand and anticipate that there would be, or could be, or depending on how people in the city government would view various provisions, there could be significant restrictions. So it might be significant for the foundation to have some time to interact with the commission or someone like you, or.
Yeah, because I'm interested in knowing, if there are specific provisions that seem burdensome, to have a clear understanding of what are those provisions and why do you believe they would be burdensome? So that if we're gonna take a look at the language and potentially correct the language or change the language, we'd be flying blind if we're guessing here as far as what language we're anticipating.
I think that's correct. I had a brief conversation with Adam this afternoon, and he acknowledged that there are significant other restrictions or other steps that you need to, hurdles that you need to pass through or over before you can move from one stage to another in development, say, of the theater block.
Okay.
To outline them all. Oh.
I'll sit close to the door, thank you.
Sorry.
And I guess the other two bullet points as well, that it contains language indicating that the code would supersede it. It would be, I think, helpful for the planning commission.
11.0116.
Okay.
13.
13, I'm sorry.
11.0113.
Okay.
Just so, to be clear,
And
we
which,
have not had the benefit of having the time to review this.
Sure.
The folks at the table have had, so we did want to make our concerns known and have the opportunity to have more time
sure,
to talk with the folks that did put this together, to have a clear understanding of what some of these provisions would, what effects they would have or could have.
and which legal agreements are of concern?
We're just talking about this clause in your agreement, which indicates that there would be, if there are greater restrictions in the zoning code, but if there are others, again, just reading the language, we're raising concerns that we have not fully fleshed out, just because this is, we would like an opportunity to have a conversation about them.
Okay, and then the last item, the proposed zoning creates inconsistencies in the application of restrictions within the greater downtown area. Are there, I guess maybe I'm being repetitive in my question, but.
No, I don't think so. I think that's a different issue altogether, and I think that's a good question. As we looked this over in the past day or so. That's all I've had on it.
Sure.
Is one day. It seems as if you're trying to designate a downtown overlay district, that you would probably want to anticipate some of the activities and some of the changes that might occur downtown. And if you exclude those areas from an overlay district, then adjacent areas that might be developed at the same time under the same circumstances have different sets of restrictions belonging to them. Is that not so?
Okay.
So your question is, would there be different restrictions because it's not in the overlay district if it's right across the street, for example?
Well, I guess I'm trying to anticipate what might be the city's interest. If they want to control one thing in one block, why would they not want to control that same thing in the next block if it's basically looks kind of the same? It's the same kind of a development, the same kind of potential improvements would be made on that adjacent block. I guess I looked at the map and I said, oh, this hasn't changed at all. Why have they not acknowledged the fact that some things already have changed in here? And then why would the city not be interested in foreseeing what might happen in adjacent areas? And if they want to control, or if they want additional restrictions in this old downtown area, what reasoning has there been to say that they wouldn't want it in the adjacent area?
Okay. Thank you.
Adam, do you want to speak to your memo, and then some of those things may get addressed as we, unless there's some additional comment.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify for the commission and the council members present, why the downtown overlay district boundary is what the downtown overlay district boundary is. It was basically imposed over what is zone B1. And that is what is currently zone B1 under our current existing zoning regulations. So when that map was drafted, the intent was those districts are where traditionally is considered downtown development. Now, obviously, Jerry's point, which is well-founded, is there are other properties that are adjacent to what is zone B1 that probably maybe fit the character of the downtown a little bit better than they would in A Street, for example, which would be that same B2 zoning district. We don't have a transition zoning that is proposed, so it is a very harsh line as proposed. Now, one consideration after Jerry and I talked on the phone today, and Mayor and I had other conversation, but as some of you are aware, the city is a member of Connect Communities, which is a program through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation at the state level. It's kind of like a mini Main Street in some regards, meaning that the goal of that group is to look at downtown and ways to reinvigorate downtowns, encourage all sorts of things, whether it's infill development, whether it's events, whether it's residents living downtown. So as part of that program, when we submitted for that, I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago, there was basically a target district created for our Connect Communities application. Connect Communities is, it's not like a zoning district, it's not an overlay district, it has no regulatory authority, but there may be some reasoning behind maybe looking at expanding the overlay district to maybe match what our target area is for this downtown program. So that's an initial thought. That would incorporate some additional areas that would be outside of the B1 district, however. So again, that's a policy decision for the commission and for the council to decide. Do we want to keep on reflect the zoning or the future potential area of what is considered downtown? So I guess that's how I would at least continue that discussion item. I do have a map of that. I apologize, one of the reasons I was trying to get the Monopad to work was to bring up this map, but I tried twice and it's still cranky with me, so I don't know if you guys want to share it. It's just the blue shaded area on that. I guess some of the other points, like the superseding language, I would leave that up to our city attorney, I guess, to answer. I think and our consultants, that's a fairly standard language. That is what zoning does. It supersedes private agreements. That's the whole purpose of a zoning code, is to regulate what can and cannot be done, regardless of what is agreed to separately between private parties. So again, while this is a new zoning code, I don't think that's a new authority being granted by the zoning code. That exists with our current zoning code, even if that exact language does not exist. That's just kind of part of the state granting zoning authority to municipalities. So I guess those were the two that I would at least try and cover in that. Council and commission members received a few page memo from me on a couple of items. I don't know if you want me to go point by point through that memo, I guess we've got some time before the council meetings, or if there were specific items that commission members or council members would like me to discuss, I'm happy to do that, however, whatever the will is.
I think if you just walk through the categories and then just offer an opportunity for questions or commentary to be made on those.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind doing that.
Okay. So I tried to break it up into two. One is the actual text of the code, looking at some concerns or some potential discussion items there. The first one is something that was discussed by the commission, and it relates to who is appointed to be on the planning commission. The commission had discussed that they would like a little flexibility, that maybe appointees to the planning commission don't necessarily have to reside in the city, but they need to have an interest in the city. So the way that was addressed in the current draft is that you can either be a resident or you own property within the city. So you have that ownership of the city, so that you're looking out for the best interests of the city while you're on the planning commission. When in kind of thinking about that further, I like the flexibility, but there's a question on, do we want potentially to have 4 citizen members on the commission, then none of them actually live in the city, even if they all own property. So it's kind of a discussion on whether or not there should be a limit on how many citizen members can be on the board and not be a resident. So that's more of a discussion item, I guess, versus a recommendation one way or the other. Keep going. Okay. Then in that same section, talking about planning commission makeup, currently Public Works Director is an actual member of the commission, so he's a voting member. He interacts, full member. There's been some concern on having a staff member of the city on the commission and actually having voting powers and potentially getting into conflict with either the public or other elected officials. So we had moved the Public Works Director and the Park and Rec representative to still be part of the commission but not be a voting member. And in reviewing it with the city attorney, there were some concerns on how it was phrased. If that's the intent, the when so requested seemed a little out of place. That's at the end. Basically, I think the intention was that the Public Works Director and Park and Rec representative would be here at every meeting. They'd be basically listed on the agenda as members. They just wouldn't have voting authority. So that seemed to kind of contradict the intent there.
On that. So then the Park and Rec commission member that's sitting on here would not have a vote then, right?
That's how it's currently phrased.
Okay.
And I know that was for sure the intent with the Public Works Director. I'm not sure that was the intent of the Park and Rec member.
I don't remember a complete discussions one way or the other on that item.
Yeah.
But if it were an elected official, I think that'd be a little bit different. They should be a voting member potentially.
Right, because a Park and Rec nominee could be a council elected official.
Right.
Or council member. Yeah.
Just because if that was the case, if we were non-voting, then would you have a quorum?
Well, we have a vacancy, so there's that issue right now as well, on top of that. But I think the question I would ask is, are we going to convert the Public Works Director position and the non-voting Park and Rec, if that's how it's adopted, as create additional citizen positions in lieu of that? And I don't remember the answer to what that would be.
Yeah, again, the current way it states is both of them would be non-voting members.
But in terms of the quantity of commission members,
There would still be 7, so we would if we went that way, Joe and Lee would be removed, and we'd have to fill those 2 positions.
Yeah, as full voting members. Right. We're not changing the size of the planning commission in lieu of this change.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So, again, that's another one. Another membership question under the Groundwater Technical Review Committee. The majority of the members are specifically their positions. It's the Community Development Director. Obviously, there's no need to appoint, because if you're the Community Development Director, you're a member. But there is one, I guess, technical or at-large member, just someone who has experience in groundwater and that type of thing. But there's no clear indication of how that person is chosen or designated on the committee. So similar to other sections, my guess is language should just be added that that's at the appointment of the, by appointment of the mayor with the concurrence of council, similar to other committees. So what happens when you sit down with the city attorney and go through? So
Very thorough, right?
Yep.
That's what you're saying.
Yes. Next one, authority. Historically, in the past, zoning administrator has been one specific person in the city, and in the current realm, that's me. However, there are employees of the zoning administrator in the community development department that often act as the people who are enforcing either zoning regulations or something like that. So just to make sure it's perfectly clear, it's recommended that we add language to that section that states that the zoning administrator or his designee can basically be in charge of enforcement or the powers found in that section. Effective outstanding obligation. The intent of this is if someone has not paid taxes for 4 years and they're coming in for a building permit, one way to encourage the payment and being a good citizen is that no actions under the zoning code would be granted or allowed to proceed until they are caught up with those other outstanding obligations. In our realm of there's special assessments and there's back taxes and all those type of things. One thing we do use, for example, for mowing of grass is considered a special charge. So it's just recommended that that terminology be added to that section.
Would developer agreements and things like that fall under that as well?
I believe the way it's phrased, yes.
Well, or other required payments or delinquent and unpaid.
Because if there's other, if there's an obligation to provide some type of service or some type of condition or some type of stormwater management or things like that, and we have a few situations like that that currently exist. And
But you're saying there's a payment to be made on it, or you're
not a
saying it's
payment.
an unfulfilled
It's an
obligation?
unfulfilled obligation, but it's not related to a payment.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, and a lot of times it's, you kind of almost have to, there's an argument over why and.
Okay. If
and
it's
I guess
appropriate because it's
I would hope that we
something
have
very
agreements
different
that have enforcement mechanisms that
to deal with those.
don't rely
Okay.
on something like this, that you
Okay.
have to get your permit. I guess I lean towards just keeping it on monetary obligations. I don't know if you guys.
So is the
have
concern
any-
utility payments, stormwater utility?
No, if there was, like, for example, if part of a development agreement were a condition of the site itself, that there's supposed to be some stormwater management. And things developed by the developer, because for the city's purpose, having those things in place are critical, but the city doesn't care who installs it. The developer could do it or the city could do it, but it's on the developer's land. So the development agreement, the developer agrees to perform these tasks. They're not performed.
But that should trigger the
Other
enforcement activity
issues.
in the
Okay.
agreement, hopefully. Is that,
Right,
generally they would.
but to Joe's point, but it is true that, okay, now they want to move on to the next.
Next
They want to
project,
go in
and-
and say, well, hold on, here you haven't. And I guess we could maybe, I guess that could maybe be handled in the development agreement, that you agree that we're not, you have to fulfill those obligations
First.
before further permits are
Okay.
granted, but
Deal with those on a
I'm not sure if
contractual
you guys have
basis.
comments on.
And really, this is tied to a parcel. It's not tied to a person or developer.
Okay. Excellent, that helps very much, thank you.
Another discussion point, I believe in the last time we had a council and commission meeting, there's discussion on the notice that would go out for either conditional uses or map amendments. At that time, there was some desire to maybe increase that distance from the current 100 feet buffer to a larger number. This draft still has what our current regulation is of that 100-foot buffer area. So,
Can I comment? I think this is the one I brought up. We had a development at the hospital, and it was 100 feet of notification. And I think it's a matter of transparency, that 100 feet's not very much. It's like 2 homes and around that area. That I was brought up 300 feet, and it was mentioned that the state has 300 feet. So that people in that area, because it's gonna affect more than 1 or 2 homes, it's gonna affect the whole block. So when you deliver on this one and decide what to do, I just like the idea of transparency versus just 100 feet.
okay. Another change in state law recently, historically, if a rezoning or a map amendment is proposed and there has been a certain amount of adjoining property owners who have objected, state law states that the city council vote is triggered to a supermajority. That has recently changed and effective as of January 1st, 2019. You can still be legal objectors, but it does not impact the vote at the council level. So that language should still be in the code, but it's recommended that we basically put in there that that action has to take place prior to January 1 of 2019. And then after that, it would reflect the state law that removed that requirement. Okay. Planned development districts, we've discussed this a little bit as well. Currently, the minimum size for planned development district is 10 acres, which basically puts it to greenfield new development, such as a large industrial user or an entire residential subdivision. It takes away some of the flexibility for just unique developments that may happen in the downtown, for example, where maybe you don't have 10 acres, but there's still the desire to create a custom district that would maybe have a wide variety of uses that aren't specifically addressed by one zoning district. So just thought maybe have a discussion on that minimum size. I would actually, in further talking to the consultant, I would remove my thought on the next one on the initiation. I was misunderstanding the purpose of that section, so permissive language does make sense there, and that permissive language is elsewhere in the code in similar situations. 110631, land uses within zoning districts. There is a section that basically states even if you're a permitted use in a zoning district, but it's a use that would potentially have emissions, dust, noise that would be above and beyond a typical use, that would trigger the requirement for that use to get a conditional use through the council. That's in the text of the code. It's something that I can see maybe getting missed in the future, so it's a recommendation that we put an asterisk or something in the actual land use table that notes that requirement. So that's just me fearing that I would miss something 5 years down the line. So, landscaping is the next one. We've run through a couple of projects on this. Currently, for every 10,000 square feet of paved area, it requires 120 landscaping points, which is basically 3 large trees, or a combination of trees and shrubs. That seems to work for a 1 acre or 2 acre development, but when you start getting into the larger ones that have very large parking spaces, that 120 landscaping points starts to, I guess, seem a little onerous in the numbers that I've run. So just a consideration that maybe that's a little excessive from going from no parking lot landscaping where we currently sit to the full 120. Maybe try it out at 100, see how that works, and then if that's not where we want to be, maybe adjust it higher in the future.
Is there a threshold that seems to be the sticking point that we could consider a tier or category for that?
I mean, one example is even the city parking lot, which will be reconstructed. If we incorporated that, it has a negative effect on it, basically because it's taking an existing parking area and trying to retrofit it. It's more that, it seems to be the issue that I'm running into. The YMCA, that when it went through the PUD, that was another example. So it's these larger developments that are going into kind of existing locations. So I don't know, I think it's gonna be more of a retrofit issue potentially as they're being reconstructed versus, I think greenfields will be able to adjust around it easier. So, yeah, so I don't really have a specific threshold. Okay. So that's why I was just looking at maybe reducing it. Next one is parking lot location. Currently we have a 3 foot from side or rear property lines and 5 feet from right of way. The current code recommends changing it and basically requiring a buffer yard when it's adjacent to residential property of 15 feet and then a 10 foot from the right of way. The 10 foot from the right of way, I guess just based on historical, how we're solely trying to get people to do this, that seems a little excessive. So I would recommend sticking with the 5 foot from the right of way. And then the other thing we're running into is if there's a property owner that owns 2 parcels or it's 2 businesses that have a joint parking area, maybe consideration on saying that that separation or that parking lot setback doesn't apply if they're basically developing a parking lot in conjunction and then they have a cross-access easement. So it didn't make sense to have individual parking lots if we can do a larger parking lot. It seemed a little more efficient. Notice of violation currently, and under state law, you only have to notify people of violations by regular mail. The language within this code encourages the use of certified mail as well. Quite honestly, that's a cost issue for our department, sending out every single violation letter. I think we've done well into the thousands over the last 6 months at a cost of what a certified mailing is. It's a burden on the city. Plus, quite honestly, the people who routinely violate, they know you just don't sign for a certified letter and they don't get it anyway. So whereas a regular mail, you have evidence that it's sent that way, people receive it. So it kind of puts the onus on the violators versus the city. So.
And regular mail that doesn't have like the city on the return address, like handwritten. Probably they think, oh, it's not from the
check.
Well,
right,
yeah.
Publishers Clearinghouse stamp on it maybe. And then finally, issuance of a citation. Currently it reads that if someone requests an extension, that a citation would not be issued. I just don't want to get into a situation where they say, well, I requested an extension, but it was completely for no good reason. So prefer to change that to that if an extension is granted, that the citation would not be issued immediately. So that's a lot, I know, but a lot of it is just really, in my mind, kind of cleanup, but there are those couple of discussion items I want to bring forward.
And that was on the zoning code itself.
Yep.
Got a component of zoning map. I guess, and since we're sort of taking fluid comments at this stage, are there, the zoning, the overlay, or the, I shouldn't say the, I guess the comment related to the overlay map has gone around the room. Commissioners, have you seen the map as it made its way around? Take it back. Sorry. This is pertaining to the downtown overlay district. That's a bit, mirrors a bit more of the Connect communities and what we refer as the downtown waterfront district. When we look at our downtown waterfront plan and others, this is obviously a bit more consistent than what the code was calling for consideration. I guess our consultants, are there any comments or?
With regard to the overlay district and the extent, obviously you know the building a whole lot better than we do. But I think we wouldn't, if you wanted to make a change, I would like to have a chance to kind of walk the area, just to make sure that we're not, including buildings or areas that really shouldn't be covered, because the overlay district is really intended to address building type and form. So that's kind of the issue we wouldn't want to make sure that the buildings that are included make sense to be included. So.
And I guess from a process standpoint, thinking forward to when the public hearing is closed and we're not taking any more public input and comment following the closure of the public hearing and the action and the council's subsequent action in July, especially as it relates to the request to kind of postpone or delay. I mean, I'd like some comment on that because there are some process implications to that.
Yeah, I guess my initial thought is if there is some concern on that specific district, there are two options. One would be to basically keep the public hearing open and postpone it to a date certain. So even if that's the next regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting in July, July 2nd, I believe it is. So that would give at least some additional time for the Mead-Witter Foundation, who has raised the concern, to investigate it. It would allow the consultants some time to view it, and then we can come back and address that. It would allow anyone else who has other items, obviously, to bring forth public comment as well, but then you're kind of just basically extending the public hearing on it.
Sure.
That would be one option. Option two, which I guess I would be less favorable of if you're, again, this is just trying to stay on our original track, would be to pull out the overlay district at this time and then bring that back as an amendment. But I think just allowing more time makes more sense from my perspective.
So the public hearing then tonight would be adjourned, not closed?
Correct.
Okay. If that's the desire of the commission.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Any additional items from staff, attorney, on the zoning code text components? Do you want to walk through the zoning map?
Sure.
Did you have something else?
Yeah, just on the discussion about delay, I wanted to maybe just address the public comment period and the, I guess, compliment the Plan Commission and City Council. We did hold a public open house. If you look at the draft that we have here, the draft is dated April 1st of 2018. So, you know, you have, and just for the perception of everybody in the room, you have created a draft and made it available for comment for a long period of time. We did have a public open house which had very good participation, and there was a number of us there to work through what possibly could have been a lot of comments, and there were some comments that we got there at that public open house. So, you know, I think it's important to note that here in the meeting. So there's not any perception that we haven't done a significant public input process, and that it's really the specific comments from the foundation that are recent. So, you know, make sure everybody understands that this has been basically in this draft form for quite a long time. So that, you know, that's for your consideration as policymakers when you're discussing the delay.
And I believe it was a 4-hour open house at the library.
Correct.
And the exact date of that was?
April. It was in April.
Yeah,
It's on the website.
it's on the website, yeah.
Or was it late in?
I apologize if you don't have that memorized.
Thought it might have been reflected on the page. But you referenced, so that's why I asked the question.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to walk into the zoning map?
Yeah,
Unless there's-
zoning map? Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Zoning map, a couple of changes, I guess, and it's kind of hard to describe it in such a way, so I did bring up my lovely handwritten marked up copy as well. But ultimately, one thing, and it's more of a color shading thing, is the mobile home parks, as I mentioned earlier, they're shown on there as a color that looks like B1 downtown commercial, and they should be shown as R8 manufactured home park, so that, again, the uses that are there are reflected. One item I'm aware of is when Ridges annexed into the city, basically where the parking in the clubhouse was, that was specifically zoned B2 as part of that annexation. The proposed zoning map mistakenly showed that as R2, so I would recommend that we retain the original zoning that was granted upon annexation. The water tower that's located over by the BMX and the Eastside Compost Center, we had generically just shown that area as park and recreation based on what is out there with the BMX track and the compost site. However, the water tower itself, it makes more sense as an institutional district, so just trying to, again, reflect the use. There is some privately held property on the corner of 54 and Chestnut Street. I've had discussions with this property owner in the past. It's an owner of a service station. Their intention in the long term is to develop that as a gas station. The current zoning map half reflects that long-term use, so I just think it's appropriate that we kind of reflect what that long-term use is expected to be. And it is in a corridor where if it's not in the business park, it's shown as general commercial, so that's why I recommended that change. Property located at 1050 Baker Street, which is right across the street from Blazers. It's a small commercial building that had been rezoned prior to my arrival to basically a neighborhood commercial type of use. And again, not wanting to set them back, I think it's appropriate that that actually be shown as B3 neighborhood commercial so that they are reflected properly. In researching Taco John's on another issue, I realized that it's, for whatever reason, it's one parcel, but half of it's commercial, half of it's residential. So to clean that up, it should be all commercial. There is an office building at 440 Chestnut across from Assumption. It's in a mainly residential neighborhood. It's not on a major transportation corridor, so the neighborhood commercial district is more appropriate than our general commercial district, so I would recommend that be zoned B3. The ambulance garage that is under construction for Aspirus, that was just recently added by the city council to the planned development district for Aspirus. That was not reflected on the map, so just want to make sure that's reflected as part of that planned development. The Tribune building located at 221st Avenue South. In reviewing the uses, it's actually more appropriate for the B1, similar to actually the discussion we had earlier. And so I would recommend that actually be zoned B1, their parking lot in that building. And then if we're reflecting just the overlay district, whatever that determination is, that would probably be added to the overlay district as well. As most of you are aware, the city has agreed to sell a portion of the Centralia parking lot to North Point for a senior housing development. That's currently shown as B2 to reflect that use and why the city sold it. That should reflect multifamily, so we're recommending that be zoned R4 multifamily. There's some property at the corner of Chase and the Expressway. It's kind of a conglomeration. There's a couple of houses there. There's a city-owned vacant lot. It's shown as something odd on the current zoning map. But really the home should be zoned R2, and then there's a portion of basically this street garage property that should be shown as institutional. And then a recent rezoning request before the Plan Commission and the Council was the southeast corner of 17th Avenue North and Rosecrans. I'm assuming it's because we knew that was going through rezoning, but there was no zoning district shown whatsoever on the draft zoning map. So based on that rezoning being denied, I'd recommend that be shown rural residential, which is consistent with all the other properties in that area. And then finally, the zoning map designates where the expressway currently runs. For whatever reason, it veers off and follows Bono Avenue out of town, and it really should follow the State Highway 34 as it heads north out of town. So those are the recommended changes that I have on them.
On the BMX track, so that will be zoned what?
The BMX track and the compost site is shown as park and recreation, but the water tower itself is a separate parcel, so I'm recommending that be zoned institutional.
But I guess the BMX, I mean, that's, yeah, I'm concerned, I mean, the whole idea is that that might be a prime commercial, and so then if someone's looking at it, and then it's gonna have to be rezoned. I mean, there's nothing wrong with retaining the BMX track there. I think they pay $1 a year, but I guess its use, I would think the long-term use is not the BMX track, it's to attract. So I guess I just bring that up of that may, not that it's necessarily a deterrent to someone, but
maybe the city wants to sell it.
would be,
Yeah,
right.
it is city-owned property, both of them, so yeah, obviously there wouldn't be a concern of zoning it to either be
Right,
too general commercial.
Adam, if it were to be zoned park, would the compost site be an appropriate land use?
It allows city open spaces, I believe, in the park category.
The compost site really isn't
let's see. And again, it's an existing use, so I don't know that that's a concern, but I don't even know what I would qualify that as.
Civic use facility.
So on page A4, under solid waste composting
Oh,
facility.
okay. Yeah, so that is conditional in that park
Okay,
designation.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
We're not allowed in B1 or B2.
For obvious reasons, you don't want a compost
Right.
facility on A Street.
Gotta make that clear.
But by rezoning it, again, it's an existing use, it would be grandfathered, it would be allowed to remain. Just obviously, you can establish a new compost facility there.
So commissioners, given the previous mention and the desire to probably wrap this up at 6 o'clock today for the before, so the city council can meet at 6 o'clock. I would assume that we would consider adjournment for today and then pick it back up at a next meeting, which we may decide we don't want it on a certain day. I'm not sure what people's wishes are, availability are on the 2nd of July, but do we have to adjourn the public hearing officially and then move into the second item? What's the process for that?
If you were to adjourn, you have to adjourn to a date and time specific.
Yeah.
And you do have a public hearing set for the plan.
For the comprehensive plan, yes.
On the second.
Which would make sense to do together.
No, that's scheduled for the council meeting on July 17th.
That's right, the council does the public hearing.
The comprehensive plan public hearing is scheduled for July 17th. So the next normal scheduled commission meeting is the first Monday of July.
The second.
Would it make sense to do that public hearing for the code on the same day as the comp plan, just prior to the city council meeting?
So that would give another month.
Is the comp plan scheduled for 5 p.m.?
No, that's scheduled as part of the council agenda, so that
Oh,
would
right,
be
okay.
actually on the
So
council
you're saying
agenda.
you can hold it again before?
Yeah, we could do it at 5 o'clock on the 17th.
Maybe 4:30?
Or, yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
So that'll be a special zoning.
It'll be a continuation of the public hearing,
Yeah,
right?
Same as this, basically a special meeting. As of now, we don't have any items on the normal July plan commission meeting, so if the plan commission doesn't want to meet twice in July, at this point, it's looking like that would be the only meeting if you held a special one on the 7th.
So with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn the public hearing until 4:30 PM, July 17th, 2018, in the first floor council chambers, or the first floor committee.
We have a motion is
July.
July 17th, the third Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. First floor conference room here at City Hall. Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, moving to a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. So move on to item number 2, which is action on the proposed zoning code and zoning map. Since we were not going to deal with that item at all, right? So-
Right, yeah, I would say that would obviously be added to that July 17th
All right.
agenda as well.
Very good. And I'd entertain a motion to adjourn, or do we take care of the adjournment of the meeting? We've never done a public hearing and adjournment, so I gotta ask.
Yeah.
but-
I believe you would still adjourn this meeting.
I don't like to
but yet
concoct
the public
minutes that
hearing
don't
is open.
exist, so I'd rather get the record correct here. So we want to adjourn. All right, I entertain a motion to adjourn. We got a motion by Wesley, is there a second? Second by Burkhart, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, we stand adjourned.